A 12-year-old boy wouldn't stop calling my daughter by his dead cousin's name, so I found out why, and I've never been more disturbed. Last Tuesday, I was working from home when I heard this awful sound from my 11-year-old daughter Amelia's room. It was the sound of scissors. I rushed in and found her on the floor surrounded by chunks of her beautiful dark hair, just sobbing. When I tried to take the scissors, she looked at me with these terrified eyes and said, "Maybe now he'll leave me alone." At first, I thought this was something to do with bullying or something, so I just held her while she cried. But when the next morning she went to school with circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept, I called her teacher, and Ms. Peterson's response literally made my skin crawl. "Oh, you mean about the Morrison situation?" "Yes. I've noticed Archie's fixation on Amelia. We've been documenting the incidents because, well, his behavior reminds me of something that happened with his older sister. Turns out, 4 years ago, Archie's older sister Emma, then 15, had to switch schools after she stalked a classmate who looked like her deceased best friend. The family got her therapy, but apparently the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When Amelia finally opened up that night, she told me that Archie Morrison had been following her obsessively. But here's where it gets seriously messed up. He kept calling her Sophie, apparently the name of his cousin who died in a car accident 2 years ago. He'd grab her wrists and beg her to stop pretending you don't remember me. The worst part? He'd been taking photos of her, hundreds of them, and posting them in some private Instagram account with captions like "Sophie at lunch today" and "Sophie wore the blue dress I like." I stormed into school the next day ready to raise hell, but the principal pulled me into her office with the school counselor. What they showed me made my stomach turn. "We need to discuss Amelia's response to the situation," the counselor said carefully. She pulled out a folder. "Other students have come forward. Amelia has been playing along." The folder contained screenshots, text messages where Amelia responded to Archie calling her Sophie, where she'd written things like, "I remember the treehouse," and "I miss you too." I was floored. When I confronted Amelia that night, she broke down completely. "Mom, I was scared. He said if I didn't play along, he'd hurt himself. He showed me cuts on his arms." But then she said something that chilled me. "And sometimes when he talks about Sophie, I feel like I do remember. Like I know things I shouldn't know. Their dog's name, where they went camping. It's probably just because he talks about it so much, right?" I was so freaked out, I decided to go straight to the source. I drove to the Morrison house that exact minute ready for answers. The dad, Mark Morrison, answered the door, and his expression immediately went cold when I introduced myself. "Your son has been stalking my daughter," I began. "I'm aware," he interrupted. "We've been trying to get him back into intensive therapy, but you need to understand something." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. This was Sophie. My blood ran cold. The resemblance to Amelia was uncanny, not just similar, nearly identical. "Now," he continued, scrolling to another photo, "this is why we moved here." He then showed me a Facebook post from my ex-husband's page, a photo from Amelia's 5th birthday party. The caption read, "Can't believe my Sophie is 5 today. Your ex-husband," Mark said slowly, "is Sophie's biological father. Your daughter and my niece were half-sisters." The room spun. I thought back to how David had always been cagey about his past relationships, said his ex was crazy, and he'd lost custody of his first kid. I'd never pressed for more details because of how devastated he seemed. "Why didn't David ever tell me?" I asked, almost scared of the answer. That's when Mark's wife appeared in the doorway. "Because he was there when Sophie died. He was supposed to be watching her. She drowned in their pool during a family barbecue while David was passed out hammered. He couldn't face what happened, so he pretended that part of his life never existed." I drove home that day in a daze, unsure what my life even was, and when I pulled up to my house, I saw David's car in the driveway. He wasn't supposed to have Amelia until the weekend, and through the window I could see him sitting with her at the kitchen table. They were looking through a photo album I'd never seen before. I burst through the front door to find David holding Amelia's hands, urgently whispering something while she stared at him in confusion and fear. The photo album lay open between them, showing pictures I'd never seen before. "You have to remember your sister, Sophie. She looked just like you." David's voice cracked with desperation as he gripped Amelia's wrists tighter. I yanked Amelia back so hard she stumbled into me. David stood abruptly, his eyes glazed with grief and alcohol, the familiar smell making my stomach turn. He reached toward the photos scattered across the table, his hands shaking visibly. "She needs to know about her sister," he insisted, swaying slightly on his feet. Amelia started hyperventilating against me, clutching her chest. Her words came out in gasps between panicked breaths. "Mom, he keeps telling me I was there when she died. He says I was in the pool too." The realization hit me like ice water. David had been planting false memories in our daughter's mind. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen next door. "That Morrison boy is parked outside your house right now. Should I call someone?" I glanced through the window and spotted Archie's distinctive red backpack in a car across the street. My mind raced through options. The police had dismissed my concerns before, treating it as a school matter. I made a split-second decision to grab Amelia and leave immediately. But when I turned toward the garage, I noticed David's car blocking our driveway at an angle that would make it impossible to get out. This wasn't coincidental. "Amelia, go pack a bag, now," I ordered, pushing her toward the stairs. Racing after her, I heard voices from the living room. My blood froze. David had let someone in. Archie Morrison's voice drifted up, discussing something about helping Amelia remember. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. Through the front window, I could see Mark Morrison's truck across the street. He was watching our house while talking animatedly on his phone. phone. I had to get past them. Amelia emerged from her room with her backpack, and I guided her toward the stairs. But David must have heard us because he appeared at the bottom, blocking our path. "You know the truth now," he said, his words slurring slightly. "They belong together. It's what Sophie wants." Behind him, Archie started humming a tune I didn't recognize, but Amelia went rigid beside me. It must have been Sophie's favorite song. David pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. Within seconds, my phone started buzzing with calls and texts. My sister's name flashed on the screen. "David says you're acting crazy," she said when I answered. "He wants me to come help with Amelia." I hung up without responding. David was already spinning his narrative, turning my family against me. While he was distracted with his phone, I remembered Amelia mentioning hiding her diary under her mattress. If she'd been documenting these nightmares, I needed that evidence. I slipped back into her room and felt under the mattress until my fingers found the small notebook. Flipping through quickly, my heart sank. Page after page detailed drowning nightmares that started right after Archie began calling her Sophie. The last entry made my hands shake. "The dreams feel so real." Archie's voice carried up the stairs. "My mom's picking us up in 10 minutes for Sophie's favorite restaurant." I shoved the diary into my pocket and returned to find Amelia frozen at the top of the stairs. My mother was calling now. I let it go to voicemail, but she immediately called again. "David explained everything," she said when I finally answered. "Maybe Amelia should stay with him until you calm down." The betrayal stung, but I didn't have time to argue. I grabbed Amelia's phone from her backpack, needing to check something. Scrolling through her messages, I found an exchange with Archie from 2 weeks ago that made my skin crawl. "My dad says you used to have a dog named Biscuit," Archie had written. Amelia had responded, "I don't know what you're talking about." But then the messages showed her gradually remembering details about a dog she'd never had. David snatched the phone from my hands before I could read more, his fingers flying across the screen. "For her protection from your paranoia," he said, pocketing the phone after changing the passcode. My work phone buzzed, a text from my boss. "David called HR about your mental state. Take the week off to sort things out." The walls were closing in. Every avenue of support was being systematically cut off. The school principal called next, and I answered on speaker so I could keep watching David and Archie. "Mr. Morrison filed a complaint about your behavior," she said carefully. "Also, your ex-husband has been asking about changing Amelia's emergency contacts. We told him that requires your consent. At least the school was following protocol." I hung up and noticed Archie had his phone out, recording something. Later, I would discover he'd been documenting Amelia for months. That evening, after David finally left with promises to check on us tomorrow, I created a fake social media profile to access Archie's Instagram. What I found there turned my stomach. Videos of Amelia sleeping in class, labeled "Sophie's tired from visiting me in dreams." One video showed her crying in her sleep during what must have been quiet reading time. Archie's caption read, "Sophie's spirit is trapped." The timestamp showed it was posted the same night David first visited Amelia alone last month. My friend Maria, whose daughter Kat was in Amelia's class, texted me, "Kids are saying Amelia's been acting strange, calling herself Sophie sometimes. My daughter's worried about her friend." I checked the dates. This behavior started right after the haircutting incident. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more evidence. Comparing Archie's photo timestamps with Amelia's schedule revealed something terrifying. He'd been in our house multiple times when no one was home. My phone rang. Mrs. Morrison's number appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I'm starting to worry about Archie's fixation," she said quietly. "Mark won't hear it, but this isn't healthy." Before I could respond, she hung up, but it was enough to know I wasn't completely alone in seeing the danger. Maria agreed to have her daughter Kat ask Amelia some questions at school the next day without alerting David. We had to be careful now that he was monitoring everything, but David was one step ahead. He intercepted Maria at school pickup, and I watched from my car as he gestured wildly, no doubt telling her I was projecting grief about the divorce onto an innocent boy. That night, Ms. Peterson texted from her personal number. "Can't say this officially, but Amelia asked me yesterday if it's possible to have someone else's memories." The manipulation was working. My daughter was starting to believe she was someone else, and with David controlling the narrative, I was running out of time to protect her. The next morning brought a new wave of attacks. David had emailed Amelia's teacher claiming I'd been coaching her to fear Archie. Ms. Peterson forwarded the email immediately, her concern evident in the brief note she'd added. I recognized David's pattern from our marriage: isolate, discredit, control. But now he had Archie as an ally in his delusion. Maria's daughter Kat approached me after school with wide, frightened eyes. She pulled me aside near the playground and whispered what Amelia had said at lunch. My daughter had looked at her sandwich, pushed it away, and announced to the table that her real mom had drowned, and this one just looked like her. The other children had heard it too. Several parents glanced at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion as I led Amelia to the car. The school librarian, Ms. Kim, caught up with us in the parking lot. She glanced around nervously before leaning close. David had requested she monitor what books Amelia checked out, claiming I was filling her head with disturbing content. Ms. Kim had refused, sensing something deeply wrong. She touched my arm gently and mentioned that my daughter seemed frightened lately, not herself at all. During the chaos at our house the previous day, I'd noticed David's car door ajar. Inside, I'd found printed emails between him and Mark Morrison. I'd photographed them quickly before he'd noticed. Now, reviewing the images on my phone, I saw their conspiracy laid bare. They'd been planning how to help the girls reunite for months. I drove to the police station station again, armed with this new evidence. The officer at the desk listened patiently, but delivered the same verdict. Without a custody order specifically limiting David's access, he had equal rights to Amelia. The stalking claims needed more concrete evidence. They suggested I pursue family court instead. 3 mothers from school reached out privately that afternoon. They'd seen David's increasingly erratic social media posts and wanted to share their own concerns about Archie. We formed an unofficial support network, agreeing to watch out for each other's children. One mentioned she'd seen Archie following several girls who resembled his cousin over the past year. That evening, I remembered David's tendency to never change passwords. His email account still used our old anniversary date. I logged in from my laptop, my hands trembling as I searched through his correspondence. There, dating back over a year, were emails with Mark Morrison. One line made my blood run cold. The girls could have been twins. I tracked down Sophie's former babysitter through her obituary. The young woman agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. She looked uncomfortable as she revealed that David used to say Amelia was Sophie reborn. She'd thought it was just grief talking, but now she wondered. He'd been obsessed with the idea even before meeting the Morrisons. David's public posts grew more unhinged by the day. I responded only with calm facts, never engaging with his accusations. His friends began questioning his version of events. Several reached out privately, admitting they'd noticed his drinking had worsened recently. His narrative was crumbling, but that only made him more dangerous. I discovered Archie had a therapy appointment scheduled for the next afternoon at 3 p.m. David had coincidentally planned to take Amelia shopping at the exact same time. The coordination was too perfect to be chance. I made sure Amelia would be safely at Maria's house instead. Mrs. Morrison texted again that night. She'd found something disturbing in Archie's room, photographs of Amelia dating back over a year, long before the Sophie connection had been made. Her son's obsession predated their twisted justification. Mark didn't know she was contacting me. She was beginning to fear her own family. The forced handoff came at a local restaurant. David had insisted on a public place, probably hoping I wouldn't make a scene. But when Amelia instinctively flinched away from him, his mask slipped completely. He grabbed her shoulders and shook her, demanding she remember her sister. The waitress immediately intervened, asking if everything was okay. Several patrons turned to stare. David released Amelia and stormed out, but not before making an offer that shocked me. $50,000. That's what he offered for me to relocate without Amelia and start fresh. He said it casually, like buying a used car. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. He genuinely believed money could make me abandon my daughter to his delusions. Mark Morrison confronted me at the grocery store 2 days later. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes disheveled. He grabbed my cart to stop me from walking away. His words came out in a rush. His brother was grieving, but maybe they'd all let it go too far. Maybe. The admission was small, but it was the first crack in their united front. I made a disturbing discovery while packing Amelia's overnight bag. Hidden in David's toiletry kit were bottles of children's sleep aids. The dosage instructions had been ignored. He'd been giving her adult doses to help with nightmares. No wonder she'd been having such vivid dreams and confusion. The drowsiness her teachers had noticed suddenly made terrible sense. The tide was turning. Extended family members who'd initially sided with David began expressing private doubts. His own mother called me, her voice shaking as she admitted she'd noticed his drinking had spiraled since reconnecting with the Morrisons. Even she was beginning to question the narrative he'd constructed. Ms. Peterson provided a written statement about Amelia's drowsiness and confusion in class. The school nurse had documented symptoms consistent with sleep medication overuse. The pattern stretched back weeks. Each piece of evidence added weight to my growing file. Maria offered her spare room despite David threatening legal action. He accused her of harboring a kidnapper, but she didn't waver. Real friends don't abandon each other, she told me during one of our late-night planning sessions. We'd grown close through this ordeal, bonded by our determination to protect Amelia. Instead of taking illegal action, I asked a friend who worked in IT to analyze the digital photos David had been sending Amelia. The metadata revealed they'd all been created recently, not years ago as David claimed. He'd been manufacturing evidence to support his delusion. I decided to confront David at his AA meeting. I waited until the break and approached him calmly. I spoke quietly about how he was recreating the day Sophie died, but he couldn't bring her back through Amelia. For a moment, his facade cracked completely. He admitted he was supposed to be watching Sophie when she drowned. The guilt had been eating him alive. David's sponsor pulled me aside afterward. He confirmed David had been skipping meetings and showing signs of relapse for months. The man promised to intervene, to try to get David back on track. It was another ally in an unexpected place. Mark's wife moved into a hotel with their younger children. She couldn't watch him enable this delusion anymore. Archie refused to leave his father, clinging to the fantasy that Sophie would return. The Morrison family was fracturing under the weight of their shared delusion. 7 different family members texted support after David's latest social media meltdown. His posts had become increasingly incoherent, filled with accusations and conspiracy theories. Each message of support felt like a small victory. The tide was turning in my favor. A lawyer friend agreed to draft custody modification papers. We documented everything meticulously, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. The papers sat ready, waiting for the right moment to file. David broke down during the next pickup attempt. He sobbed in his car, admitting he saw Sophie every time he looked at Amelia. He heard her calling for help in his dreams. He couldn't save her then, and it was destroying him now. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. The school staff staff apologized for their initial dismissal of my concerns. The principal admitted they should have listened sooner. They implemented new protocols and provided written statements supporting my version of events. Every institution that had doubted me was now firmly on my side. David's employer granted my request for a restraining order at our workplace. His options for harassment were narrowing. Each avenue he'd used to control and manipulate was being systematically closed off. Mrs. Morrison revealed another disturbing pattern. Archie had never properly processed his grandmother's death. She'd lived with them, cared for him daily. When she died, he'd begun fixating on people who reminded him of her. The pattern of replacing lost loved ones stretched back years. I made sure Amelia stayed with trusted friends during the most dangerous confrontations. Her safety came before gathering evidence. Slowly, away from David's influence and without the sleep medications, she began remembering her own life clearly again. The fog was lifting. 12 parents signed a petition requesting Archie's removal from school pending psychological evaluation. The community was no longer willing to ignore the danger he posed. David's attempt to pick up Amelia from school failed when staff followed the new safety protocols. He raged in the parking lot, but they held firm. My mother finally visited Amelia at Maria's house. When she asked about Sophie, Amelia flinched so violently she knocked over her juice. My mother's face went white as she finally understood what they'd done to her granddaughter. Her whispered apology came with tears and a promise to support us completely. Former friends who'd initially sided with David began reaching out. Each came with apologies and offers of support. His support network was crumbling as people recognized the truth. Even those who'd believed his initial story couldn't ignore the mounting evidence of his instability. Pharmacy records confirmed what I'd suspected. David had been buying excessive amounts of children's sleep aids from multiple stores, staying just under the limit that would trigger suspicion at each location. The pattern showed careful planning, not concerned parenting. The school administrators scheduled a crucial meeting to determine their official stance on my safety concerns. I spent the night organizing everything: statements, evidence, documentation. David was demanding to be Amelia's primary contact, but I had ammunition to fight back. The breaking point came during afternoon pickup. Archie broke free from his father's car and ran toward Amelia, screaming for Sophie not to leave him again. Parents pulled their children close as he fell to his knees on the asphalt, sobbing. The entire school witnessed his complete breakdown. Mark dragged him away, but the damage was done. I realized that winning meant more than just protecting Amelia. David and Archie needed help, real psychological intervention. I shifted my approach, focusing on David's need for grief counseling and rehabilitation rather than attacking his character. The school counselor noted my mature handling of the situation. Extended family members testified about David's deterioration since Sophie's death. His brother admitted David had never been the same after the drowning. His drinking had spiraled, his grip on reality loosening with each passing month. They'd watched him fall apart but hadn't known how to help. A child psychologist explained to the school board how forced identity confusion could cause lasting trauma. She detailed the specific harms Amelia had already suffered and the potential for permanent damage if the situation continued. Her testimony was clinical but devastating. The school agreed to flag Amelia's file. Any changes to her records or pickup authorization would require both parents' presence. David stormed out of the meeting when he heard the news, his last avenue of control slipping away. That night brought a new horror. Archie appeared at my bedroom window, holding what looked like a doll. Through the glass, I could see it was dressed exactly like Sophie had been in the photos. He stood there silently, clutching it to his chest, waiting for something I couldn't give him. My neighbor's Ring doorbell notification showed Mark Morrison's truck slowly cruising past at 2 a.m. He'd done 3 passes, each time slowing in front of our house. The surveillance was escalating. I forwarded the footage to my growing evidence file. David's employer placed him on leave pending mental health clearance. He blamed me publicly, posting increasingly incoherent videos online. Each one showed him more disheveled, more desperate. His professional life was crumbling alongside his personal delusions. A support group formed among the affected families. We shared resources, kept watch schedules, and provided emotional support. What had started as one family's tragedy was becoming a community's stand against delusion and manipulation. Mrs. Morrison finally left Mark. She moved in with her sister, unable to watch him enable their son's breakdown any longer. She offered to testify about the conspiracy between Mark and David, providing crucial evidence of their planned manipulation. I presented a detailed timeline to anyone who would listen. It showed the clear escalation pattern: David's drinking relapse, finding the Morrisons, recognizing the resemblance, and the systematic grooming of Amelia to remember being Sophie. Each piece clicked into place, revealing the full horror of what they'd attempted. The breakthrough came during a supervised visit. Amelia looked directly at the court-appointed observer and stated clearly that she felt sad for Sophie, but knew she wasn't her. She was Amelia, had always been Amelia, and wanted to stay Amelia. The clarity in her voice brought tears to my eyes. Mrs. Morrison's recordings arrived the next morning in a padded envelope. I listened to Mark and David planning their psychological manipulation campaign, their voices casual as they discussed ways to make Amelia believe she was Sophie. The recordings spanned months of meetings at various grief support groups, where they'd stopped actually participating and instead met privately to strategize. David's credit card statements painted a damning picture. He'd been attending legitimate grief counseling sessions until meeting the Morrisons, then abruptly stopped. The charges shifted to restaurants and bars where he and Mark would meet. I photographed every receipt, building my evidence package methodically. The family court accepted my documentation that afternoon: medical records showing Amelia's sleep medication symptoms, testimonies from teachers and parents, proof of the conspiracy between David and Mark. The clerk's eyes widened as she processed the sheer volume of evidence I'd compiled over these harrowing weeks. David's family staged an intervention at his apartment. His brother texted me updates as they confronted him about his delusions and drinking. David initially resisted, insisting everyone was against him, but eventually broke down sobbing. They gave him an ultimatum: treatment or complete isolation from the family. That evening, Mark Morrison appeared at my house, clearly intoxicated. He pounded on the door, then collapsed on the front steps, wailing about how Archie asked for Sophie every single day. Through the window, I watched him curl into himself, a broken man drowning in grief and alcohol. Archie sat in their car, staring blankly ahead, completely dissociated from reality. I called 911 for Mark's safety and my own. The police arrived within minutes, finding him still on my steps, now vomiting into my flower bed. They arrested him for trespassing and hammered driving after discovering he'd driven there with Archie in the car. The boy watched his father being handcuffed with no visible emotion, lost in whatever world he'd created to cope. Some neighbors gathered to watch the scene unfold. A few whispered among themselves, and I caught fragments suggesting I'd gone too far in exposing the conspiracy. One woman shook her head disapprovingly as the police car pulled away. Standing alone on my porch, I felt the weight of my choices, but knew I'd make them again to protect Amelia. I spent that sleepless night reviewing everything, wondering if there had been a gentler path, but each time I pictured Amelia's terrified face, or remembered her confusion about her own identity, my resolve strengthened. Protecting her had required harsh truths and difficult confrontations. The next morning brought an unexpected decision. I chose to drop the trespassing charges against Mark in exchange for a binding agreement, mandatory therapy for Archie, and a permanent no-contact order. The prosecutor thought I was being too lenient, but I recognized that punishment wouldn't heal anyone. These broken people needed professional help, not jail time. David's text arrived that afternoon from a treatment facility. He'd checked himself in for a 90-day program addressing both alcoholism and grief counseling. His message was brief but clear. He finally understood that Amelia wasn't Sophie, and apologized for the trauma he'd caused. He promised to respect whatever boundaries I set going forward. The therapy sessions began immediately. David worked with his counselor while Amelia met with hers, a specialist in childhood trauma and identity confusion. The professionals would share relevant findings to ensure everyone's safety while maintaining appropriate boundaries. It marked the first step toward genuine healing rather than forced reconciliation. Through his therapist, David's admissions emerged. When drinking, he saw Sophie everywhere: in strangers at grocery stores, in children at playgrounds. He'd convinced himself that Amelia was his second chance to save his daughter. The delusion had consumed him, fed by Mark Morrison's similar desperation to bring back his niece. Mark's revelation proved equally disturbing. Sophie had experienced recurring dreams about another girl who looked exactly like her before she died. She'd described these dreams to her parents, insisting her twin was out there somewhere. Mark now wondered if she'd somehow sensed Amelia's existence, though the therapist suggested it was more likely coincidence that Mark had twisted into meaning after her death. Mrs. Morrison arrived at my door unexpectedly one afternoon, clutching a manila folder. Inside were Archie's therapy notes showing genuine progress since the delusion shattered. He waited in the car, having written an apology letter he wasn't ready to deliver in person. His therapist believed that with continued treatment, he could eventually lead a normal life. I faced a crucial decision about allowing supervised communication between Amelia and Sophie's family. After long discussions with Amelia's therapist, we established a careful plan. Limited contact would be permitted only within therapeutic settings, with professionals guiding any interactions. Amelia's healing took priority, but complete isolation from her half-sister's memory might cause its own damage. The choice to show mercy proved harder than maintaining anger would have been. Rage was simple, clean, protective. Compassion required navigating complex emotions and accepting that David and the Morrisons were suffering too. But Amelia needed to see that healing was possible, that people could change and grow from their mistakes. Amelia read Archie's letter during a therapy session. He apologized for scaring her and acknowledged that she wasn't Sophie. He missed his cousin but understood now that Amelia was her own person. His closing line, suggesting they might be friends someday when he was better, showed a maturity that hadn't existed weeks ago. David's final manipulation attempt came through his brother. He threatened Sewers lied if he couldn't see Amelia, a desperate ploy for control. Instead of giving in, I worked with his treatment team to ensure he received immediate psychiatric intervention. His manipulation tactics were symptoms of his illness, not weapons I'd allow him to wield. Mark's plea for the children to heal together was firmly rejected. Individual therapy had to come first, establishing solid foundations before any joint sessions. The professionals agreed that rushing reconciliation would undo the progress both children had made in understanding their separate identities. 3 months passed before Amelia made her own choice. After consistent therapy and careful preparation, she decided to write Sophie a letter and visit her grave. We went together on a crisp autumn morning, Amelia clutching the letter she'd worked on for weeks. At the gravestone, she placed the letter carefully and whispered that she would have liked having a sister. The moment was hers, not orchestrated by adults trying to force connections. David's letter from rehab arrived 2 weeks later. He took full responsibility for his actions. Acknowledging the trauma he'd caused while in the grip of grief and addiction, he requested no contact until Amelia turned 18, and only then if she chose to reach out. The letter showed genuine understanding of the boundaries necessary for everyone's well-being. The school counselor provided regular updates on Archie's progress at his new school. The Morrison family had entered intensive family counseling, working to process their grief in healthier ways. Reports indicated that Archie was slowly forming age-appropriate friendships and engaging with reality more consistently. The new custody arrangement was finalized without contest from David. He couldn't access Amelia without supervision and proof of sustained sobriety. He signed every document without argument, his lawyer confirming David understood and accepted these terms as necessary for his daughter's safety. Amelia's therapist observed remarkable progress in our sessions. My daughter could now differentiate clearly between her own memories and the false ones David had tried to implant. She understood the manipulation she'd endured and was developing healthy coping mechanisms for the trauma. 1 year later, I watched Amelia playing with friends in our backyard. Her hair had grown back to its former length, dark and shining in the afternoon sun. She laughed freely, no longer glancing over her shoulder or flinching at unexpected sounds. The ghost of Sophie that had haunted our lives had finally been laid to rest with compassion but firm boundaries. That evening, as I tucked her in, Amelia mentioned casually that she'd had a dream about swimming, but instead of the panic that once would have followed, she simply smiled and added that it was just a dream. She knew the difference now. I held her close, feeling the solid reality of my daughter, whole and healing and irrevocably herself. The Morrisons continued their therapy journey, learning to honor Sophie's memory without trying to resurrect her through other children. David maintained his sobriety, building a new life that acknowledged his past without being consumed by it, and Amelia grew stronger each day, secure in her identity and surrounded by people committed to protecting her truth. Our story wasn't one of dramatic victories or public vindication. It was quieter than that, a careful rebuilding of trust, a gradual return to normalcy, a family learning to navigate trauma with professional help and community support. The conspiracy that had threatened to steal my daughter's identity had been dismantled not through revenge, but through patience, evidence, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Some nights I still checked the locks twice and peered through curtains at unfamiliar cars. The hypervigilance would fade with time, my therapist assured me, but I'd learned to trust my instincts, to fight for my child even when others doubted, and to choose compassion without sacrificing safety. These lessons, hard-won through one of the darkest periods of our lives, would guide us forward into whatever challenges lay ahead.